Welcome to the Christmas edition of the Slingshot. Today's special guest is Katie Wells, a geographer and researcher at Groundwork Collaborative. Katie is the co-author, along with Funda Spilda, of a new study issued by the Roosevelt Institute about the uberization of nursing, which we'll be discussing today, as well as the co-author, along with Declan Cullen and Kaifu Atto, of a new book called Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City, published by Princeton University Press in 2023. Prior to joining Groundwork, Katie was a postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown, and Katie holds a PhD in geography from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. Katie, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks, Hal. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and welcome my friend and co-host Darren Bush, who agreed to take a break from grading papers in his antitrust class to join us today. Welcome, Darren. How's everything?
Great. I actually finished grading, so I'm
Oh, and
good to go.
fun fact that two of Darren's former law school students at the University of Houston, Mark Metter and Melissa Holyoke, will soon be commissioners at the Federal Trade Commission.
Well, Melissa was at Utah, so
Oh, at Utah. Oh, Utah.
yeah.
Melissa at Utah and Mark at Houston.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's impressive. So we're going to discuss three topics today. First, Katie's new study titled Uber for Nursing, How an AI-Powered Gig Model is Threatening Healthcare. Second topic is Katie's new book, Disrupting DC. And sticking with DC, our third topic is going to be DC's assault, as I like to put it, or maybe the New York Times like to put it, on a would-be competitor to Uber called Empower. So Darren, why don't you kick things off? Folks are probably tired of listening to me speak so much.
Not at all, Hal. They're not tired of listening to you speak, but I'll kick stuff off. So Katie, let's talk about your new study and these gig worker nurses. Where can I find them in a hospital?
I'm afraid you can find them everywhere in the hospital, as far as we can tell. But they're also not just in hospitals. It's not just in the ER, not just in sort of the NICU or the PACU. They're also in dental offices, surgical centers, nursing homes, rehab facilities, and in the state of Ohio, correctional facilities.
Oh, wow. So how does I know there's something in healthcare called the Joint Commission, which actually runs, sort of regulates some of these, what happens in hospitals along with state law. How did they get away with just having these random workers saunter in and out?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. And one of the empowering or disappointing things about qualitative research is that we don't have a great sense of who's looking at this, right? This
Uh,
is a deep dive into the working conditions of about 30 workers and looking at the structural constraints of this industry. But, when reporters ask me well, how big is it? I'm like, I don't know. What are lawmakers doing about it? The only thing we could find was a state preemption case, a state preemption law in Colorado. I don't know if you saw that, Darren, in the report, but I was so fussed up about it. And I hope someone will dig into it to figure out how is it that the state of Colorado has already taken Uber's playbook on Uber drivers and now applied it to gig nurses and said that these workers are exempt from any local regulation or any other kinds of rulemaking.
oh, wow. Okay. Because I know that, for example, nurses are supposed to have an orientation and things of that sort. And there's nothing like that
I
for.
mean, aren't they also supposed to have workers' comp? I mean, some of these things are, I don't understand how it works. And I really hope that someone, will take this report as an impetus to figure this out.
Okay. So it appears like the on-demand nursing apps give all the power to the employers. You can cancel shifts and only pay for a few hours if you do that. You can shorten shifts. You get ratings to the employees in terms of their profitability. And you even point out that overtime counts against the workers. Um, is there anything in this app that's pro worker?
That's a great question. Yes. And I would say that there is nothing inherently wrong, and both of you know this and have written extensively. There's nothing inherently wrong about technology that allows workers to have control over their schedules. And we see this firsthand in the Mercy hospital system in, I believe, Minnesota, where a hospital system has deployed a scheduling app so that it's already oriented, employed, insured workers are able to have a say in picking up extra shifts and or scheduling themselves. A lot of these workers need control. They've got to get their dad to dialysis, their kid to school, their kid stays home from school. Like these are caregivers already who are also nurses and nursing assistants. And so this does give them some semblance of control so they can make their, life make sense. I have to be honest, in talking to these workers, I had the same feeling I had when I was talking to Uber drivers. For our book, we followed 40 for 5 years, and also my subsequent work on instant delivery drivers. Like, if I had their life constraints and their life conditions, I would also choose these apps
Okay.
because the
So,
existing labor market offers so little for them, flexibility wise, that it makes sense. That's one of the questions we wanted to ask with this work was like, why are these gig nursing apps making sense for so many people, either the medical administrators or the workers themselves? And it comes down to that scheduling control. They have so much responsibility in their lives. And we don't have a social safety net. So like if we had scheduling, stability laws, and I think Oregon has some, like would that make these apps look less attractive? And I think the answer is yes.
so it's flexible, except if you want to go and segue into some more structured work, because you mentioned that there's a non-compete clause between Uber nurses and say shift med. You discussed that on page 22 of your report. Um, and you give two instances of the non-compete clauses prior to the FTC rule, and a lot of us think the FTC rule is probably going nowhere in terms of protecting, given new administration and things of that sort. But how pervasive are these non-compete clauses between?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also would like to know. We were really concerned about finding them. We don't know how many times they've actually been employed is the wrong word, utilized. Um,
Okay.
I don't know, but it's like one of those things where you think about David Seligman's work, right, on Uber drivers, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and thinking about how he in California has taken on sort of these companies by saying, okay, if these Uber drivers are actually workers, then you are engaging in, the company is engaging in price fixing by not letting them set their own, prices. And so I think about, this FTC thing as, I mean, not the FTC, the non-compete thing is like, wait a second, are these independent contractors that actually have power, or are you treating them like workers in this case? And so it's sort of, I don't know, it seems like it would, in another world, I imagine it would be something that could be shot down.
So, Katie, from one of your prior answers, it sounds like you don't have a problem with the technology per se, using the technology to allocate, nurses to areas in need, right? That's at least what I'm drawing from an earlier answer. But so the problem must be how this particular app is being implemented. So, can you just describe what are the aspects that are most offensive and that
Yeah,
you think need to be taken care of?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I should say, I don't know that I am I should say that the technology itself to allow workers to get to choose which shifts and when they're available to work, that does not feel offensive to me. What feels offensive to me and so many of these workers is the idea that there's no required orientation for many of these facilities that use this, that there's no visibility, the informational asymmetries are so huge that workers don't know if other workers on the shift are being paid differently than them. They don't know if they're being rolled out, if they're getting the same choices about which shifts to pick up. The data tracking is huge and how it's affecting this possibility of personalized pay or algorithmic wage discrimination. And so the way in which the worker has so little power, that really concerns me.
I got it. And now this is a related question because I already think that these nurses are beginning from a hole in the sense there already is an asymmetry, maybe not on the information sense, but at least a bargain asymmetry between these powerful buyers that they're working for. So I imagine that we already begin from a level of exploitation. And when I thought, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but assuming we do, I think your thesis is that the app is actually enhancing the exploitation beyond what it already is, right? And so the question is, what is it about the app, that's doing that? And I'll let you go, but I also have a conjecture too, which, this real page litigation that's going on suggests that sellers are able to coordinate in their pricing and
Or algorithmic
utilization,
pricing.
right, decisions. Is that going on in this app as well? Is there coordination going on among the buyers? Maybe that's how it's making
I would
things
love to know
worse.
the answer to that, Hal, and I hope someone takes up that project. We have been talking to some journalists about doing some tests to try to think about or see the extent to which the same worker is offered a alarmingly similar hourly rate from multiple, let's say, sellers. So I don't know the answer to that question, but it wouldn't be hard to imagine when we think about insurance or other kinds of collusion, other markets where there is collusion and coordination besides, real estate and real page and rentals. Um, yeah, it's hard not to see this, alongside stories about Kroger's and, other
Yeah.
kinds of massive market players.
Now, I wasn't aware of this, but I was talking to someone about your study, and she mentioned to me that there was a similar app or technology used to allocate doctors away from the hospitals that they're typically assigned. I think it's called locums. But I was told it's done pursuant to all sorts of regulations and rules. And so I'm curious if you're familiar with that, and like what is, how was this app or these apps able to sidestep the regulations that attach to moving doctors around? Why is it? Is there some particular reason for that?
I have no idea. I have to say, I don't know. We know that this is also happening in France. We've heard some reports about Italy. I don't know why nursing and nursing assistants, like did COVID give some cover to this argument that there's a nursing shortage? It might have. Like this might have been sort of the opportunity for these companies to slide in and say, well, who else is going to solve this problem? And so that whole story of there's a shortage of nurses, which we try to challenge in this work and try to lift up the work of scholars who have said, no, actually, there's not a shortage of qualified, employable nurses. There's a shortage of decent jobs that they're willing to take. I wonder if that plays a role, but I'm just guessing.
Okay. Well, I want to think more about this app because it's kind of interesting. So let's play this. Let's play a game. So I bid into the app at a particular wage, whatever wage I want, and if I'm not picked, so I have to lower my bid to get picked. And at the same time, the hospitals and other facilities can cut shifts and curtail supply. And as they do that, I get more desperate and I bid lower on my wages. Is that right?
That's what we have documented. Yes.
Wow. Okay. So the coordination question at Hal asks is an important one.
It's a really important one, especially when you look at the out, like one of the things we collected from these workers over time was screenshots. And when you see to the penny similar hourly rates, there's some big questions going on, right? As we're also reading through the DOJ, real page stuff.
And and so once I get picked, assuming I get picked, I get
I don't know, Darren. You think you're gonna get picked? I don't know.
no, I don't.
Okay.
uh, and so but
But you might go onto a Facebook page to ask other people if it's a good place to get picked from. That's the other thing that's happening is workers are trying to give each other information about, oh my God, don't go to that facility. So, but let's say you find a facility that you think you're willing to work at and you think they might pick you. All right, I'm game.
so so I show up and I show up in an ICU or an ER or some other, fairly intensive rotation. And I have no clue how the hospital's set up. I have no clue the practices. I'm just thrown into the water.
Yes, and often you will be, let's say, not signed up for the ER, but you will get transferred in there because ER often garners higher pay. But nurses being nurses, there is a code of, like practice that requires you to do what is asked of you. And that doesn't mean that that information gets back to the app that pays your wages.
Okay. And I may not know this I mean, this relates to the quality of care that people might be receiving from these Uber nurses, because I have no clue where anything is struck,
Well,
how.
it's why a lot of them bring their own stethoscopes, thermometers, and what are those cuffs called? The blood pressure monitors?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they bring it because they also say, look, like these are people who want to do a good job. They are in the nursing profession and they are frustrated when they can't either get a key to the supply closet or they don't know where it is and they don't know if there's enough items there or if they're working. And so they want to go do their job and they come in with their own equipment.
Right. So so not only that, so they're also tracked on the app when they so they agree to be tracked right from when they leave the house.
When they turn on their app. Yeah. Yeah. And so
Wow.
that message is like if you're not close enough in time, if the app thinks you're running late, it'll send you messages like you're too far.
Yeah. And then if you lose tracking, you can get, I mean, you may lose pay.
It's
And
hard because you clock in and out of shifts on your phone. Now, there have been some differences over years if sometimes you also have to get the facility to sign a form, sometimes you don't, things like that.
I just think of somebody evil just watching you walk up to the door and canceling your shift right before you get there. But that's
We've
just me.
also heard, look, we've also heard some stories about, unscrupulous workers who also drive up to the parking lot, they log in and they drive away. I mean, they clock in, right?
Katie, I
Boy.
want to I want to shift over to your book, but I do have one more question, if it's okay, on the study, um, and that is, if you could wave a magic, regulatory wand and like strike one aspect, or say two aspects, or I'll let you even go to three if you can come up with it, of the current system as it's implemented, like
Yes.
what needs to be fixed?
Absolutely. I think private equity's ownership of these facilities and the debt financing that is, if you think about Gabriel Wynot's The Next Shift, that is a context in which, like, that's the background story of like what happened to all of these are community hospitals. This is not Johns Hopkins. These are not unionized facilities for the most part. I have a kid that's medically complex, has had 8 surgeries. Like, we are so lucky we're able to do it at Johns Hopkins where there's unionized workers there. What I would fix is I would fix the financing for a lot of these rural or community hospitals in the Midwest and South, which is, we think, especially where this is happening. So help out these facilities. We would also talk about the labor market for existing nurses and nursing assistants so that they themselves make enough in their primary job and have enough control over their scheduling that they don't need to turn to this. And I think those two would be my first magic wand because I think fixing the issues on these apps is sort of like a bit of a red herring. I don't know what's a whack-a-mole. It's sort of like we're not really talking about this is a symptom of two bigger
Oh, that
problems.
makes sense. Yeah, I got it. All right, let me turn to the book, because this is the second topic, disrupting DC. And I highly commend, by the way, you also wrote a review, or you wrote a synopsis, I think, in the New York
An
review.
essay that was inspired by it. Yeah.
Yeah, which was amazing, and just it was very easy to get through, and I was very moved by it.
Good.
So I mean, if people want a kind of nice taste before they go out and buy the book, I think that's a good place to start.
You
There
could
was a
also go to
line.
the library. I'll send anybody a PDF on this podcast.
Okay. Okay.
Go buy the
Great.
book.
Great. Okay. Hold on. So in this New York review, you had this line that caught my attention, and it said, "quote Using tactics favored by the gun and tobacco industries, such as corporate sponsored research programs and aggressive consumer messaging campaigns, they, and this is Uber, have pushed local governments to deregulate chauffeur services by eliminating safety provisions like licensing, background checks, and vehicle inspections." So, what I was excited about is if you can give us an example or two of some of these corporate research programs that Uber has been funding. I'm just curious if we would have known of them. Are there any universities involved by chance? It reminds me. I remember that that Kruger study that came out, eventually became a Brookings co-authored piece with Harris, circa 2015, purporting to show that Uber drivers were happy and well paid. So, are there other examples that you have in mind? Do tell.
Besides that Princeton piece.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's also Cornell, Lewis Hyman. His work has been funded and supported by Uber, and he was key to some debates in Seattle about minimum wages for Uber drivers. There's also a kicking program at George Mason University has also toyed with some ideas in this realm.
You don't happen to know which branch within George Mason? I mean, or I don't know if you want to share, but that sounds very consistent. Or you could just keep it. It's fine. Okay, how about this? Let's keep going. You explain that by not treating.
Oh, but I can give you, oh, so
okay.
sorry, Hal, I can give you other examples. I mean,
Yeah.
there also was, an example of outside of academia, Uber also funded a study in its early years saying that taxi drivers are racist. And the Washington Post even covered a study that was paid for by Uber without being forthcoming and saying this was Uber paid for research, right? And so there were also those kind of corporate sponsored research programs that were outside of university.
Academia. All right,
And
got
that,
it.
really like, it advanced the idea that like, oh my gosh, like taxis are so racist. We have to go with Uber. Ooh.
Yeah. All right, let me try this one on you. You explained that by not treating their drivers as employees and by not maintaining a fleet of cars, Uber, and I love this phrase, quote, externalizes both labor costs and capital investments onto workers. Almost like it sounds like you're channeling your inner economist about externalizing costs. I think this is important insight, but I'm curious if you could tell us what's the argument. It doesn't have to be the economic argument; just could be any argument
I don't know that.
as to why firms and not workers should internalize these costs. And I can suggest maybe it's because firms are in a better position to do so.
Or because they're going to benefit from they're more likely to reap the rewards.
Is that, I mean, is that it? Is it that simple that's why they should be doing it?
I mean, we as a society have, sort of set up these safety nets, however eroded, to suggest who is a bigger player and who's better able to take care of whom. And we've, embedded that a bit in the employment relationship and business relationships, but also there's a question of benefit that I think is key, not just responsibility, but who's gonna, profit from it.
I got it. Well, that makes sense.
But what did you think? Was there something
No,
else?
economists like to make things complicated. Like we have like articles on efficient risk bearing and all this other bullshit. And I don't know. I didn't know if it was
I'm
getting
a
more complicated than
geographer.
that. All
Yeah,
right.
this is a moral argument.
Okay, good. I like it. So I also I talked to a lot of book authors, and I read a bunch of good reviews from you, including one by Sandeep in the American Prospect, which I'm going to ask you about. Before I get there, was anyone mean? Were there any bad reviews, perhaps funded by Uber? Just curious.
I mean, well, I will say what was odd. Okay, so I will tell you about one bad review, but I'll
Okay.
first tell you two oddly good reviews. One was in the American Conservative, and the other one was in the Washington Examiner.
Okay.
And what was interesting about those two, and we didn't see it coming, was their point was, yes, metro is broken, public transit is broken, and cities are broken, right? Like we are taking on sort of like the neoliberal city as a way to say we need to move left. But these conservatives read the book and was like, yeah, see how messed up it is? That's why we have to go further towards Silicon Valley. So it was funny to hear, it was funny to see the appeal of this argument. Or like it was harrowing to like realize how naive we were to think that in taking down a blue city that would appeal to reddish folks.
But any mean ones? Were there any mean ones though?
Well, the only mean thing I will say is I testified earlier this year in front of Kevin Kiley at Congress, and he is on the right. And he and the Flex Association lobbyists that represent Uber, Lyft, et cetera, DoorDash, and Instacart, I mean, they were quite rude and mean about sort of a qualitative research study and its findings. So they were, I would use the word vicious.
Okay. Yeah, I've been there before. I know that. Well, that's why you come onto the show. This is part of your therapy session afterwards. Kind of get it all out. But there's a line from Sandy before I turn it back to Darren if he's got any questions about the book. He reminded us that Uber was so powerful that it actually got the Federal Trade Commission, probably on more than one occasion, but at least on this one occasion, to write a brief. And this was submitted to a Chicago alderman pleading for deregulation. It was a 2014 letter by the FTC's Office of Policy Planning. Do you remember that part of Sandeep's review? It was penned by Gavel, Feinstein, we know where she wound up, and Gaynor. This is impressive muscle, right? To get the a federal regulator to lobby on your behalf.
Mhm.
Um, are there are there any other episodes like this that where Uber was able to deploy a government agency in its favor?
That's a good question. I'm not going to think of one off the top of my
I
head.
thought I thought. Hold on. Oh, really? I was going to
I mean,
suggest one too.
I was going to say, but I wasn't going to say agencies. I'd say the number of political, people that David Plouffe and other people that had in its pocket to go across the country. Who are you thinking of?
Oh, when I think the FTC got involved on Uber's behalf in some proceeding out west about categorizing workers as contractors or employees. I thought that the FTC also weighed in on Uber's side through that too. Um, hey, Darren, do you want to take it on any other questions on the book?
Yeah. As soon as I figure out how my Zoom works, apparently I haven't used it enough since 2020. So I want to push you a little bit on the whole notion that Uber has um, um, about helping access Black and immigrant communities by affording them more flexible hours, and so that Uber is actually doing performing a solid for minority communities. What do you think of that argument?
I think it's been one of its most powerful arguments, its most genius PR moves. What it did investing in that argument that I said about how taxis are racist and positioning itself as a solution to a racist taxi system, to inadequate public transit, I think was genius. And I don't think that it could have done what it did over the last decade without that argument. I don't see, as an empiricist, I have yet to see any research that shows that that is the case, that what they claim is true, that they service poor areas, that they don't discriminate the way taxis do, that they, actually provide poor or, workers of color with meaningful work. And meaningful, I mean like actually like earning enough, to cover minimum wage.
I have two suggestions. All right. So well, actually, one's a cultural reference, and then a suggestion about the interesting notion in terms of racism in terms of carrying passengers. The cultural reference is Branford Marsalis has a jazz song called "Brother Trying to Catch a Cab" on the East Side. And the whole notion is he wants to go to Brooklyn, and the cab guy goes no, and then the jazz starts. Uh, so there's some embedded notion. I mean, like some sort of cultural stereotype there
Well,
that
but it's not just stereotype. There's real purchase in that complaint. I mean,
yeah.
that is a real experience of many, many people.
So, I agree. And so, but to extrapolate that throughout an entire industry across an entire nation is a little trickier. Um, the other thing is if Uber's suggesting that cab drivers are racist, I think one way to go push back on that might be the fact that Uber has a rating system, right? So I'm curious, and there's a lot, I'm thinking about my industry in terms of student evaluations and how those evaluations tend to be biased based on gender and based on race and things of that sort. But I'm wondering if the rating system actually probably demonstrates some sort of biases as well, both how the driver rates the passenger and then how the passenger rates the driver.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would love to see data about that. We do know that passengers with black sounding names have been found to, have to wait longer for pickups.
Well, and my own personal complaint is I live pretty close to an airport, and the number of Uber drivers who actually have tire issues, or I've had several Uber drivers who have had flat tires in a row trying to get home from the airport. Now the cab drivers aren't happy about it either, but they get the little short trip ticket. But the Uber drivers are just like, no. So there might be even a geographical discrimination component to that as well.
Well, yeah,
Um,
I mean, they're only encouraged to go in places where there could be greater demand because that's where they can extract the greater wage. And that's why in DC, there was a moment, and we document this in the book, when they tried to create an artificial surge at the airport by manufacturing a surge, manufacturing a scarcity so they could create.
no, that's something we learned about in electricity markets too. You can actually create your own scarcity and just by cutting capacity. And so, yeah, prices go
And
up.
Uber shut it down. Uber brought the airport police and was like, meh, I'll let you guys do that. We're capping that.
So let's talk a moment about Operation Rolling Thunder in DC, um, which got the DC Council to remove the price premium to protect taxis and wheelchair accessibility requirements um, from legislation. What do you think of Rolling Thunder?
Oh my gosh, you know what that you guys must know that phrase on Operation Rolling Thunder from the like Vietnam bombing campaigns.
Yes.
Like, can you believe that? We thought that was like so egregious of a title. So yes, so in summer of 2012, DC was one of the first places in the world and the first in the US where Travis Kalanick faced some municipal dissension, let's say, and pushback. And the DC Council at that point had been in the throes of a whole debate about what to do about taxi modernization. Do they need, like, we didn't even have a uniform color. We had just gotten, like, what are those things called? Metered, what's the thing where you pay by credit card, but also like metered pricing? So it was a moment in which there was a lot of debate. Uber comes on the scene and at first says that they were open to some price minimums. Maybe they would agree to wheelchair accessibility requirements for their fleet and possibly also a ban on dynamic pricing or surge pricing. But Travis Kalanick, being Travis Kalanick, the night before, the vote on these proposed amendments to regulate Uber, sent a message to everybody who had ever downloaded the app in the first instance of clicktivism in the US, which we might call, like click activism, click. And it totally worked. He got everybody, 50,000 emails were sent to the council in a 24-hour period, 37,000 tweets on, that thing still called Twitter. And it totally worked. The Washington Post called it a rider revolt. And so brand loyalty turned into this gross new form of political citizenship.
Hmm.
And that was, for a long time, that was the end. DC was held up in Uber's view as sort of like the city that had rolled out the red carpet and created model legislation that then they took and dropped around the country and the world.
Yeah, and some great storytelling there, especially in that New York essay about how Austin was starting to make inroads, and I think the Texas governor created an exemption for statewide. You tell some great stories about that, but their success. I mean, if you at least you got to hand it to them. They seem to have a well-oiled machine when it comes to flipping legislators and getting the legislators to work in their direction.
Yeah, I mean, they're terrified. I mean, this is who wants to be against progress and innovation in the future? I mean, it's a compelling story, right? Especially for cities, which are messy and slow and tedious. I mean,
Right. So I want
and
to,
it's also there's intractable problems, right? There's intractable problems that Uber offers to solve. And I think that's the same thing to keep in mind about the gig nursing apps. These apps are offering to solve an intractable problem.
I see. I see. Oh, and so people are kind of willing to maybe bend over to accommodate them because they think they're doing something so good. So you were kind of all over my feed this week. When the study came out, your study was getting retweeted, and then I read a New York Times story this week on a firm called Empower, which is based not very far away from me here in McLean. And at least this is all I've read about them, so the slant that I've been indoctrinated with. But it seems like the city is trying to put Empower out of business by, among other things, hitting them with fines. I think it was even tens or $100 million of fines, and impounding the cars of empowered drivers, which is fairly harsh to kind of take it out on the drivers. But the CEO of Empower told the New York Times that the council was being co-opted manipulated by Uber as a way to basically protect an incumbent monopolist. And I have to admit, when I saw Empower's wages, or at least the formula that they use for the drivers, it seemed more generous to me than Uber's in the sense that you paid $350 per month to get a license, and then you kept 100% of your revenues. That's
That's
how.
just one of the amounts, Hal.
Oh, well, I'm just telling you what I saw in the story. That you
You
informed
know,
me. This is my limit. That story is the limit of my knowledge of
and I
Empower.
pitched that story, Hal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but all right. You can conceive though how, if that was their primary economic model, and maybe it's not, this 350 license, then you, the driver, keeps 100%. That would upset Uber because it would put competition on what they have to pay their own drivers. Uber is keeping a take rate. I've
If
seen
they actually
estimates.
were a significant market player, which they are not, but when their numbers are reported by and repeated without any data backing them up, I mean, it's really frustrating to me.
So what happened? How did the story get it wrong? I'll let you fix the record.
I'm really thankful to the writer for
Yeah.
taking on this issue and digging into it. It is messy and complicated and hard, but at the end of the day, we have rules in place as a city to try to make sense out of chaos. And what Empower has refused to do for 4 years is abide by those rules. They refuse to pay taxes on their services. They refuse to vet their workers. They refuse to make sure that those workers are insured. And so they have all these workers going around the city purporting to work for a ride hail service that denies that they exist and creating serious risks for public safety. So it infuriates me also the idea that they say, well, we empower workers, we give them 100% of the fare. Sure, but you also charge, they have to pay money from Stripe, to take out their earnings. I mean, there are hidden fees, but there's also, that 350 you said the subscription, it goes up, based on how much they earn significantly for each extra few $100s. It is a company that is trying to do what Uber did a decade ago. I feel bad for them. Honestly, they're just a decade too late. They're like the kids like got the bad trend and didn't realize that it had already passed. Like the tech bros that had their go and got to run around DC in 2010s, and get their say. Like that moment's over. DC Council has started to push back. In 2018, we started with data requirements for Uber. Just this week, I was very happy to see that the DC Council established some minimal regulations around instant delivery. Like Josh is just treading up the wrong trend, like the wrong, like he's swimming upstream, like he missed it.
I got it. So
And I do think that he has taken, if you look at when you talk to these workers and you understand that they have been deactivated from Uber and Lyft, that they, have had bad passenger reviews, when you hear why they've turned to Empower, I am sympathetic to them in the sense that Uber is no beacon of decency, right? So is Uber a problem? Absolutely. Is Empower the solution? Oh my God, no.
yeah. Well, the question then, is how are we going to get the wage share up for Uber drivers? Like to me, that's an important policy question, right? Because the take rate is too damn high.
Of course, but look what's happened with the utilization rate in New York City as like it becomes something they play with. I mean, this is a really difficult thing. You look at the lockouts in New York City when you're there, like I feel like New York City and Seattle are a bit of like a warning from the future for those of us that haven't yet even established minimum wages. Because they're saying, look, even if you do establish it, right, look at the games that companies play to avoid it.
Yeah. But would you be a fan of, say, as an alternative to get the wage share up, like collective bargaining, labor rights, unionization, these sorts of things?
I mean, I'm sort of hesitant. I'm not feeling pretty optimistic about what happened in Massachusetts, if that's what you're asking about, in terms of establishing sectoral bargaining before establishing like employee rights. That makes me, I mean, it's a game of chess in some level. Like, which move are we going to make first? That's not my gut, that makes sense. It worries me greatly, especially if we're using company-ish unions. But I'm not good at seeing the future. I didn't know Trump was going to get elected the first time. Like, I
But
don't.
you think the most important fix here is getting the classification right?
Well, no, I think the most important fix is addressing the public transit woes and all of the structural problems in our cities that allow these Silicon Valley companies to come in and create short-term shitty fixes.
Let me see.
And I think that if we don't address that, then again, it's like playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that's a good point. Darren, did you have anything else on this Empower fiasco and my misreading or the Washington?
No, I mean, Hal, it's also,
I know.
I mean,
I
I
just,
feel really badly about how it came out because I think that it's wild to me. I mean, they literally, I mean, there, I think there were pictures. They had like a January 6th moment where they came in and interrupted DC council hearings on something totally unrelated. It's like they want the government to approve them, but they don't actually believe in government rules, which is what Uber, I mean, I don't blame them because that's like what Uber did a decade ago, but too late, too little, too late.
Darren, you get the last word or last question.
Well, it's kind of interesting because Uber had a reputation, at least when it first came out, of, being a rogue, even flouting regulations, and then having the regulations come in after it. And so Empower's trying the same
Which it
model.
wrote.
Right. So Empower's trying the same model, but they don't realize that players are already trying to pull the ladder up already and maintain that position. So
I mean, I literally thought Uber was funding them at some point to make Uber look good. I thought this was genius. I mean, because they're $100 million fines they've already accumulated. Like, what?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. But Katie, it was so much fun to have you on the show. And we appreciate your time, especially so close to the holidays. And hope you're going somewhere fun or doing something fun or just getting to spend time with family during Christmas. Um, any exciting plans? Anyone?
I am. I am taking we're having a family trip to celebrate an aunt and uncle's 50th anniversary. So
Very nice. Well, enjoy that. Yeah, enjoy the holidays. And we'll check back with you soon, Darren. We'll see you. We'll come down and pay you a visit in Houston too. Does that sound like a plan?
absolutely.
Okay.
Hopefully, I'll be done with writing by then too. So,
Okay.
all
All
right,
right. Well,
everyone,
have a
happy
good day,
holidays.
guys. Bye bye.
thank you guys so much. This